Good afternoon, all of you, and welcome back to the research seminar series of ISID. And today we are going to have a book discussion. Professor T.C. Anand sir was supposed to chair this event, but due to some personal emergency, he can't join this event. So that's why I will be moderating, and I'll be giving a very brief introduction about the speakers and the panelists, speaker and the panelists. So to start with, the author, Professor Raman Mahadevan sir, he is a very senior economic and business historian, and he is specializing in the area of industrial and capitalist development in colonial South India. Today we are discussing his recently published book titled "The Fortune Seekers: A Business History of Nattukottai Chettiars." So this book is about the Nattukottai Chettiars, who were one of the most prominent business community from Tamil region. And this book captures their spirit of enterprise and that led many of them to seek their fortunes overseas. And we will hear more about this book from Sir. He has also published other several publications, including the book Shaping India Economic Change in Historical Perspective, and also the South Indian Economy, Agrarian Change, Industrial Structure and State Policy 1914 to 1947. So it is published by OUP. So today we have three eminent panelists to discuss this book. Starting with Professor Nasir Tayabji, is a former director of Center for Jawaharlal Nehru Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia. He has also held various important positions in various prestigious institutions, including JNU, MIDS, Indian Institute of Public Administration, Administrative Staff College of India, and Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. And he is also an economic historian, and he has published several papers and book. And his book on forging capitalism in Nehru's era, India, Neo-Colonialism and the State, 1940 to 1970, is an important addition to Nehruvian studies. So I'm sorry if I'm skipping, if I'm unable to give you more details. Actually, I'm just replacing an answer's introduction. That's why. Sorry for it. And the second panelist is Mr. Harish Damodaran. He is a very well-known journalist, and he is currently working as the National Rural Affairs and Agriculture Editor with the Indian Express. Before joining Indian Express, he was working with the Press Trust of India and the Hindu Business Line. And his work mainly focus in the area of farm sector, macroeconomics, business, and social history. And he is also a senior visiting fellow at the Center for Policy Research. And he has authored a book titled India's New Capitalist Caste, Business and Industry in a Modern Nation. And third panelist, Dr. Satyaki Rao. He is associate professor with ISID, and he has worked extensively in the area of labor and employment, structural change in India, emerging trends in the manufacturing sector, growth and human development in India, and the political economy of informality. So with this, I invite Professor Raman Mahadevan sir for his presentation. Thank you.
Vinny.
So we can take around 20 to 30 minutes, sir, for the presentation.
May not take that much time. Let's see. I mean,
Okay.
I'd rather we have more time for discussion.
Okay, sir.
It's a pity Dr. Professor Anand couldn't join us. I'm deeply honored that I put down my thoughts in writing, so I'll just read it out, rather than speak extempore. I feel that it'll be more meaningful if I just put down a few points, relating to the book or issues emerging from the book. So at the outset, I feel deeply honored that ISID took it upon to organize this book discussion event around my recently published book, The Fortune Seekers: being an account of the historical journey of the Nattukottai Chettiars. May I convey my heartfelt appreciation to the director, Professor Dr. Nagesh Kumar, along with his colleagues at ISID for this initiative. A word of special thanks to Dr. Beena for meticulously overseeing the details of this program and ensuring that it goes off smoothly. Special thanks to all my distinguished co-panelists, Professor Nasir Tayabji, Mr. Harish Damodaran, and Dr. Satyaki Roy, for agreeing to be part of this discussion. I'm sure I'll go back greatly enriched by their comments and observations. It's nice to reconnect with ISID after so many years. I'm presuming that many of you who are in the panel and who have joined online would have either read the book or at least read some of the excerpts that have appeared in popular news magazines such as Scroll, Outlook, Mint, and the News Minute, besides the detailed review which has recently appeared in the Deccan Herald, and would therefore have some broad idea of the storyline of this book. Though Indian business communities across India were legendary and exercised a dominant influence in the credit and commodity markets from medieval times, the Chettiar story, as revealed in my book and by many predecessors in academia, is unusually fascinating, with few parallels. It's exceptional in the manner in which an elaborate organizational structure subsuming an intra-caste banking network was put in place as far back as the last quarter of the 19th century to effectively utilize the overseas opportunities to their advantage. It was also exceptional when compared to the record of other business communities for the manner in which the community soared to great heights, but then eventually weakened quite considerably over time as an economic resource pool. A brief overview of the book with respect to the broad concerns would be in order here. The book looks at the historical journey of probably the most prominent business community of South India. This study was basically informed by the larger conceptual issue of the making of a regional capital in South India. By virtue of being the most prominent fraction of South Indian capital, one chose to look closely and critically on the nature of entrepreneurship within this community. Broadly, the book focuses on the historical journey of this business community from the 19th century to the immediate post-independence period. It focuses not only on the much-researched pre-1930 phase of the migration of Chetty capital to the overseas regions of Southeast Asia to take advantage of the colonial commercialization process and the attendant wealth accumulation, but more significantly, it also focuses on the Depression and the post-Depression period, including the Second World War and beyond, and the manner in which it affected the fortunes of the community. The period from 1930 to 1950 was a turbulent phase marked by fast-paced socio-economic and political transformation, which majorly destabilized their traditional banking structure and modes of operation. It compelled the Chettiars both as a community and as individuals to come to terms with the emerging situation and the harsh reality and to adjust, accommodate, and diversify. In fact, the USP of my book is that it's probably one of the few books which covers the post-1930 turbulent phase. In fact, I would go as far as to say that perhaps on a lighter vein, the Chettiars have been a milch cow for the academic industry, in as much as in that almost over a dozen dissertations have been submitted all across the world, not just in India, but outside India. And most of these studies are largely based on two very important reports, very voluminous reports which deal voluminously with the Chettiars. These are the Burma Inquiry Committee report and the Madras Provincial Banking Inquiry Committee report. So much of the work that has appeared so far has drawn mostly from these reports. Mine is a departure in that sense that I have looked at other kinds of sources, throwing light at what really happens to this community and the whole process of differentiation within the community, which occurs very sharply in the post-1930 period. I shall now take this opportunity, since I've summarized the book, I don't want to go into the details. I shall now dwell upon a few analytical issues that emerge from the book, and issues that resonate beyond the book. I refer to the question of transition and diversification from banking and trade to investment in modern industry. This is an issue that is well known and has been commented upon at length. However, what I wish to discuss here is the inter-regional variation as well as the inter-business community variations in entrepreneurial response. Thus, as it was observed, a good number of the members of the business communities from Western India, from Eastern India, and Northern India chose to channelize part of their investable surplus into modern industry in the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, and thereafter, following the introduction of tariff protection to a number of consumer good industries such as textiles, sugar, paper, etc. However, down south, the Chettiars were not found to be emulating this path on a scale comparable to those elsewhere in India. In view of this development, the assumption by a few scholars that the industrialization process that got underway from the 1930s in southern India, especially in the nodal Tamil region, was the outcome of the thrust provided by Chettiar capital in retreat is misplaced. I say so because how did this assumption emerge in the first place? I am inclined to believe that it had to do with the general notion that by virtue of being economically the most well-endowed and prominent fraction of South Indian capital, it was assumed that it couldn't be anyone other than the Chettiars who could provide the thrust and momentum to industrialization in South India. This is not to suggest that there was no return migration of capital from the overseas in India in the immediate post-1930 period, but the point that needs emphasis that it was not a conspicuous flow, but a mere trickle, and much of this found its way into the tertiary sector in the form of trading companies, insurance and banking companies, stockbroking companies, rather than into the productive manufacturing sector. At this stage, emerging from this, the other conceptual issue that some scholars have raised and which perhaps requires to be addressed seriously is whether it's a prerequisite for capital to move into modern industry and to be categorized as genuine capitalist, or should we, or is it not possible for us to consider skipping the transition to industry and moving into modern tertiary sector as sufficiently capitalist? I mean, this is an issue which needs to be addressed. I mean, is it a sine qua non? Is it a prerequisite for capital to be capital, modern capital, for them to be a modern capital, to invest in industry? Is it not possible to skip investment in industry and move directly into investment in the modern tertiary sector?
Sorry, sir. One thing. Would you enable your camera, because Dhananjay is trying and he said that he is not able to do. If you want to,
you're not able to see my face?
No.
Yeah. We are not able to see
We
you.
thought that you chose
to. I think you have muted your video.
Oh, have I? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Is it okay now? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm not very technically savvy. I must have pressed some wrong button. Sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry, could you hear what I had said?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Now, it may be worthwhile to delve into this apparently anomalous situation. Following the depression and the attendant severe economic crisis reflected in the steep fall in the prices of the primary products, the Chettiars, as the principal purveyors of credit, found themselves in a situation where they had no option but to seize the pledge collateral to seize the pledge collateral when the debtors were unable to repay their loans. Thus, in a matter of no time, Chettiar capital was locked up or frozen into immovable assets in the form of land, plantations, tin mines, urban property, etc. Now, given the depressed value of these assets right up to almost the end of the 1930s, there was a reluctance, and quite naturally so, to dispose of these assets at the depressed levels. Now, the point that I'm making is, why was the capital in retreat from the overseas a trickle and not a flow? I'm providing an explanation. So one of the reasons was much of the capital gets locked up into immovable assets. So obviously they were not in a position to dispose of their property, realize a reasonable sum of money and bring it back to India. That was one. This was one of the conditions that prevailed. There was an abiding hope that things would look up and there would be a turnaround, enabling them to recoup some of the losses incurred during the Depression. This unfortunately didn't happen, as the Second World War broke out and the Japanese overran much of Southeast Asia, including Burma, and played spoilsport and completely derailed and jeopardized Chettiar's vital interests in the overseas. The other major factor...
Raman, you've disappeared again. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sorry. Have I? Oh, sorry. Can you help me, Puppy? I mean, what's happened, Puppy? Yeah. 1 minute. Yeah. I think I need to keep my hands away from yeah, okay. Sorry. The other major factor in deterring Chettiar from repatriating capital, especially in the late 1930s, prior to the outbreak of the war, because there was a period between, say, 1938, 39 and 1941, 2 years, when suddenly the prices escalated, land values went up. So there was an opportunity for the Chettiars to possibly dispose of their property and return to India. But that didn't happen, partly because they were hoping that these favorable conditions would persist beyond 41. They couldn't anticipate the outbreak of the Second World War and that Japan would, occupy much of Southeast Asia. Anyway, so the other major factor in deterring Chettiar from repatriating the capital, especially in the late 1930s, prior to the outbreak of the war, was the taxation policy of the government of India, which categorized proceeds from the sale of their assets as profits and thus liable for taxation. I mean, the Chettiars gave a lot of representations, but, it was not considered by the government of India. This acted as a deterrent in facilitating the repatriation of Chettiar capital into southern India. Yet another disincentive of sorts was the near oversaturation of investment in the industrial sector, especially in textiles, insofar as South India was concerned, thus contributing to the lowering of profitability levels in industry. There was thus no significant pull factors operating in southern India in the pre-war period strong enough to attract overseas Indian capital. Prior to the 1930s, the returns on investment through banking in the overseas was significantly higher than that in industry. This was the argument that was advanced right through the entire period to explain their weak presence in industry. I mean, the argument that, the returns on investment in banking and money lending is much higher than the returns on industry, which is a fact. So this is best expressed by the business analyst Nanalal Mehta, writing in Eastern Economist, a widely read, popular economic and business magazine of the late colonial and early post-independence period. I think it was controlled by the Birlas. He made the following observation. I think it is worth a while to hear him out. And he says, I quote, "The Gujarati and the Marwadi Vaishyas have been prominent in trade, business and industry practically throughout Western and Eastern India. In the south, Chettiars, a community akin to the Gujarati and Marwadis, have been prominent chiefly in money lending. The Chettiars have hitherto been averse to putting their money in industrial enterprises, perhaps because the return in money lending and distributive trade has been very much higher and more consistent than that from industry, which is necessarily subject to cycles of boom and depression, unquote. This is not to suggest that there was absence of any association of Chettiar capital with modern industry. As a matter of fact, one of the earliest industrial ventures in southern India, industrial ventures promoted by indigenous capital, was the Malabar Spinning and Weaving Mill, promoted by the Deshamangalam Nambudripad family in 1884 near Calicut or Kozhikode now, was majorly assisted by a prominent Chettiar group, the ALAR family of Devakote, when the Deshamangalam family encountered problems of finance and management. The same group went on to promote the Kaleshwara mills in Coimbatore in as early as 1906, taking advantage of the favorable environment arising out of the Swadeshi movement. Quite a few other mills, whether in textiles, paper, or sugar, were acquired by the Chettiars, but only as creditors when the original promoters defaulted in repaying the loans. Possibly the only other major notable exception to the customary Chettiar investment model or route was a gentleman by the name Karamuthu Tyagaraj Chettiar. This family consciously and deliberately kept away from banking, concentrating exclusively in trading in textiles. The Karamuthu family, Tyagaraj Chettiar family, promoted a textile mill as early as 1925 in Madurai, at a place taking on, the powerful A&F Harvey, entering A&F Harvey's bastion in Madura. A noticeable inflow of Chettiar capital into modern industry occurs largely during the period of the Second World War, a period marked by tremendous surge in demand for textiles and following it of exceptionally high profits, windfall gains for mills all across India, including South India. We observe Raja Sir Group, one of the most wealthiest Chettiar families, who very consciously kept away from investing in industry right through till the 1940s, chose to acquire a defunct mill in a place called Podanur, called the Lotus Mills. They acquired the mills, got it repaired at nominal cost, and made exceptionally high profits in a matter of 3 years. So you find Chettiars really moving into industry only when the profitability rates were really high, especially during the wartime. Likewise, we find another very prominent Chettiar family, the MCT Chidambaram Group, MCT Chidambaram Chettiar, who had promoted the Indian Overseas Bank, and controlled one of the largest insurance companies in South India, called the United India Insurance Company, which was later acquired by, which was later nationalized and became part of the Life Insurance Corporation of India. So we find MCT Chidambaram Chettiar also, interestingly, channelizing a part of his surplus into textiles precisely in the 40s by acquiring the Sikh Elphinstone Mills in Bombay. So he's probably the first person to invest outside South India in Bombay. He acquires the Elphinstone Mills. And thereafter, together with G.D. Birla, he and Birla were the first entrepreneurs in India to move into an extremely modern sector, namely man-made fiber, rayons. So G.D. Birla promotes Gwalior rayon in Gwalior. And interestingly, both of them invest not in British India, but in princely states. G.D. Birla invests in Gwalior, and MCT Chidambaram Chettiar promotes the Travancore rayons in a place called Perumbavoor in Travancore. It's very interesting. Besides this, the plantation sector in South India was one area that attracted a fair amount of Chettiar capital, again in the 1940s. and 40s and 50s. Much of this was channelized into coffee plantations in Mysore. And significant amount of this capital was the capital in retreat from the overseas. In fact, I have data to support the fact that 10 plantation companies were promoted by the Chettiars in one single year between 1942 and 43. The relatively high price of coffee prevailing at that time, together with the investment in plantations being categorized as agricultural and hence outside the purview of income tax or any other taxes, was a major inducement in attracting Chettiar capital. Now, these are some of the issues that I've raised. The basic point that I was making was that you do see all this, but in relation to what they were in the pre-1930, there is a significant decline of this business community, between 1930 and 1950, to the point that barring a handful of business houses, most of them have really disappeared. Many of them collapsed in the 1930s and 40s because of post-depression. Many of the mid-sized, smaller firms with much of their investments in Burma lost out because of the land nationalization bill that was passed in Burma, whereby all the land that they held, because much of their investments were in land, was seized without any compensation. So that was really a major setback. So that's the point that I make, that in relation to the other business communities whose investments remained largely within India, and therefore did not face the kind of problems which the Chettiars faced, was, I think, a major factor in changing, in a sense, transforming the economic landscape of South India. And the other point that I make is that the fact that unlike in Western India or Eastern India or Northern India, where merchant communities were able to exercise a fairly dominant control over the credit and commodity markets, the Chettiars, by moving out of South India and concentrating on the overseas, created a space for other social groups to emerge and take advantage of the entrepreneurial space created in South India. I think I'll stop with that, yeah.
Thanks, sir, for providing a very excellent summary of the book. And now I invite Professor Nasir Tayabji, sir, for his comments, observations.
Thank you. First of all, of course, thank you, Raman, for producing this book, which gives us a lot of empirical information about what took place in not just in southern India, but also in Burma and Malaya, as far as these enterprises were concerned. My point and worry is slightly different, and that is on the question of industrialization in Madras Presidency being much less vibrant than in Bengal or in Bombay Presidency. Now, there is a well-known saying that what cotton was to Bombay Presidency and jute was to Bengal Presidency, oil seeds was to Madras Presidency. The importance of these is that in the imperial balance of payment system that the British had introduced, there was a market opened up in China for cotton yarn and later for cotton textiles, which Bombay entrepreneurs were able to use. And there were no great problems in terms of tariff barriers. Similarly, Bengal had almost a world monopoly of jute. So the jute mills in Bengal had, again, no problems in exporting jute products to Britain and to Britain's continental creditors. Britain's continental creditors are important here because as far as oilseeds were concerned, which, as I said, was a major cash crop of Madras Presidency, groundnuts and coconut, while groundnuts and coconuts were allowed tariff-free entry into France and Germany, any processing of these products, even in terms of groundnut oil or coconut oil, were heavily taxed in those countries. That meant that the markets that were opened up abroad for jute and for cotton were not there for oilseeds. And so the oilseed processing industry, which could have formed the base for a larger industrialization of the South, didn't ever take off. Now, within this context, Raman's book has introduced several more interesting features. One thing, for instance, I found interesting was that obviously some cotton was grown in Madras Presidency, but Raman tells us that the market for raw cotton in Tirupur was dominated by the Marwaris. And so the Chettiars could not find any space for themselves in the cotton market, which again would have provided, in principle, ways of moving up the value chain. Now, so the first thing I would ask is, what was the nature of the entrepreneurship of the Chettiars that prevented them from fighting it out with the Marwaris and the Multanis, as Raman has pointed out? And why did they concede this particular market so entirely to North Indian interests? The second thing that I found interesting was there is a word that is very frequently used by Raman about the whopping profits and the extraordinary profits. And this term is used by him in several cases. It struck me as interesting that the Marwaris, or rather the Chettis, go where there is extraordinary profits to be earned. Now, obviously, one cannot complain about that. Business will do that. But why is it that they do that and they don't think of any other consideration? As I said, they go to Burma and they go to Malaya. And as Raman pointed out, the ones who go to Burma have a tough time after the Depression, when Burmese nationalism comes into play, and they face very severe obstacles, not only from the government of India in terms of its taxation of capital import, but also from the Burmese government. Now, the thing that struck me was, how were these Chettiars so blind to the development of the national movement in Burma? They seem to have made absolutely no efforts to establish links with these national elements. They seem to be living in a kind of cocoon, a very highly profitable cocoon. And they were impervious to what was happening around them in Burma. So even the temples that they built and were so lavishly funded seem to be, at least the impression I get, is only for themselves. There's no question of developing any social institution or any other activity which would have drawn the Burmese peasantry to their side. The Burmese peasantry was only a source of those whopping profits that Raman talks about. And there is a similar lack of foresight. If they had been following even rudimentary the development of the political movement for independence in Burma, they would have been more aware of what kind of problems they would face. In fact, they just seem to have sat there making enormous amounts of money until they were thrown out. And as Raman has pointed out, when they tried to come back, by that time, the value of their assets had fallen so low that they would probably not have been able to come back. The point I'm making about all this is that I would really like to know what is entrepreneurial about the Chettiars. It doesn't mean that anyone who sets up a firm or takes over another firm is an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur involves a certain long-distance vision and an opportunity to work towards that vision. And in all the examples Raman has mentioned, they don't have that. In fact, I correct myself. Raman mentioned several prominent cases of failure of Chettiar companies, and these seem to be the companies that are genuinely entrepreneurial. They go into new ventures, even in the 40s, but they don't survive. So there's no doubt that the Chettiars were an extremely wealthy group in the 10s and 20s of the last century. But my point is that they seem to exist in vacuums. They go into vacuums and fill them up. They don't ever seem to deal with areas which are not vacuum and make use of their resources to work there. Raman hasn't mentioned it, but and I also don't know very much, and I know nothing about Burmese agrarian history. But I would presume that for whatever reason, in Burma, the money lending and rural money lending and rural trading community was either very sparse or for whatever reason, the British government in Burma encouraged the Chettiars to go there to fulfill this particular aspect of the commercialization of Burmese agriculture. I think I'll stop there. But as I said, my basic point seems to be that why is it that the people who made enormous amounts of money did it in very, very safe circumstances? The handful of people who tried to go into more adventurous areas failed. In both cases, it seems to me to be a failure of entrepreneurship. But I would like to be corrected if I have misread the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the comments. And now we'll move to
Shall I respond?
Mr. Harish.
Beena, shall I respond altogether or?
Sir, together. After, sir, together you can respond, sir.
Okay.
After completing all the
Sure.
panelists.
Okay,
So
I
now
think
we'll
I'll-
move to.
Yeah,
So
am I
please
audible?
continue.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. I think I'll take off from what Nasir has said. I mean, it's very fascinating. The absence of long-term vision. I mean, I think this applies in general to most of India's, business communities, the traditional business communities. Okay. See, I'll start off with some this thing. I mean, there's a general thing that that the Chettiars are the Vaishyas of the South. Whereas if you look at it, they don't fit into that cultural Vaishya kind of a thing. See, like for example, I don't think they are vegetarians. I mean, if you look at whatever Chettinad chicken, it's a very their names are all very non-Sanskritic. Annamalai, Vellayan, Chidambaram, Muttaya, Palaniyappan. So very non-Sanskritic kind of names. I think many scholars tend to, I think it's basically lazy theorizing. The Vaishyas means, it is Nattukottai Chettiars. But some of the numbers which I saw, some of my favorite pages in Raman's book. The one is there's an appendix, page number 201, showing the top 12 Chettiar firms in Burma. It's incredible. Raja Sir Group, 86,000 acres, somebody 27,000 acres. And it's not just in Burma, he talks about Malaya, right? In Malaya, there are about 1,000 Chettiar firms, with assets valued at 40 crore rupees at that time. This was in 1929, 1930, and the fact that lot of rubber estates, even tin mining companies, which are being owned by Chettiars. And in Sri Lanka, in Ceylon, we have something like 15 crore rupees. So this is all nothing but pure money lending capital. So if you see, and basically short-term returns. So if you look at it, I think our business community hasn't changed from that time. Basically where there is money to be made. Especially basically by not sweating money. If I can just lend money instead of putting that money, building industry, which takes time. Even if I were to say set up a dairy or something, I need to collect milk, many things. I need to set up, milk processing plants and all. So I think this is basically the essence of Indian capital. Basically you don't need to, without sweating, if you can get the money out. I think that has been the essence. So I'm not very surprised that the Chettiars, they melted away. We have seen similar communities. You look at, say, for example, Kachi Bhatiyas, right? They were very big at one time. You look at the Moraji mills, the Thakarse mills, the Khatau. And Khatau were big even in things like sectors like shipping. You look at Varun Shipping, Great Eastern Shipping, right? The Sheth family. So, and plus, just like the Chettiars, they were also abroad everywhere. They were in, I think they were in Oman, Bahrain, Zanzibar, all these countries. So a lot of their capital was invested abroad, and probably again for short-term trading, that kind of profits. Whereas I think today, if you look at it, the only Chettiar group which has some status, and probably they don't represent the Chettiars at all, is the Murugappa group, the Murugappa Chettiars group. You look at the profile of their companies, which are solid manufacturing companies, like say Coromandel International, right? The TI, the Tube Investment, Carborundum Universal, etc. And of course, they also have interest in finance. But probably, I think the Murugappas represent all that is not Chettiars, and what they should have been. Okay. Whereas you look at a group like, say, I think you were referring to Raja Sir Annamalai Chettiar. Today's pick is finished. It's over. I think A.C. Muttaya, he ran down the company, And so when you look at it, even the guys who invested, who remained, who managed to plow back their money and start something, I think today it's only the Murugappas who are there, And in a way, this is very remarkable because probably there's no other community which grew so much, and grew overseas, and today have virtually, virtually disappeared, as far as the business. But probably one favor they did by exiting Southern India is that they helped many other business communities, emerging business communities, to emerge. Say, for example, the Nadars. Say the Gaunders. Apart from, of course, Kammas, Reddys, etc. But probably, if the Chettiars were strong and they were entrenched in the south, maybe we would have had a different kind of a picture. Maybe there would have been no Tirupur. There would have been no Shivakashi, there would have been no Virudhunagar. you know. So I think that is one favor probably they did, you know. And it'll be good to look at, see, because today, whether it's a fact that you know, Eastern India is a graveyard. You know, we may talk about whatever industry, jute, etc. But whereas it is the South which is in the ascendant, you know, and it'll be interesting to see how these, I mean, who have been the main drivers of, say, Hyderabad, you know, Chennai, and you look at some of the groups like the Nadars, for example, you know, the way they have grown, you know, and today I think most of the consumer industries in the South, you know, they today dominate, you know, whether it's say an Arun ice cream, you know, Hudson Agro, or the thing. Same is the case with, say, the Gounders, you know. So these are just some of my random observations, you know. But I would concur with what Nasser said, that you know, there is a problem, you know. Why is it? But on the other hand, like, how is it that, say, the Marwadis, who are more or less with the same tendencies, right? I mean, money lending, trading, how they got into industry, you know. Is it the fact that because they remained within India, maybe and then they captured, you know, and then they captured the space, you know, which was vacated by the British, by other communities, like even if you look at, for example, say the Morarji mill, right? I mean, Morarji's mill was acquired by Piramal, right? And the Piramal group became very big, right? And same thing, you had the Sassoon mill, right? I mean, the Baghdadi Jews, you know, and it was acquired by Ramnarayan Ruia, you know. So I think in that way, probably the Marwadis were more agile, you know, more adaptive, you know, whereas probably the Chettiars, the demise is very interesting. On the one hand, as Nasir says, you know, basically short term, you know, basically without sweating capital, I can just lend money, I can do that kind of thing, and you do it in the most safe places, you know. You see a little bit of competition, you run away, you know, like you face some competition from Marwadi money lenders or Multani, whatever, the Sindhi money lenders, you run away. And then you go to you go to Malaya, you go to whatever, Indochina, you go to all these places. So it's very interesting, yeah. But it'll be nice to connect to the present, you know, where clearly, I mean, South is in the ascendant, and you know, yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, sir, for adding interesting insights. And now we'll move to Satyaki, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bina. First of all, thanks to Professor Raman for this fascinating account of Chettiars. And as I see that it is an account of about 1.5 century. If I am correct, the book says that the first Chettiar farm is in 1820. And the book, the scope of the book is basically accounting the decline of the Chettiars till the Second World War. So if we see that their major activities, as all the speakers have underlined, that it was trading and money lending. And it is quite interesting that their original capital was basically temple funds, which was community funds, which gradually transferred into this process of money lending. They traded with salt, rice, pearl, cotton, and all this, and also opium and arak with Ceylon. So trading was one of the major activities in which they were involved. And to an economist, I think it is quite interesting because it once again gives a realization that capital is not something which is abstract figure or something the way you used to understand. It is related to certain social relationships. It gives rise to certain moments which creates conditions for the accumulation of capital. And this we see, these moments and these concrete conditions we see throughout the book, which is quite interesting. Now, there are a few questions which I want to raise regarding the analysis which was also given in the initial presentation. So it basically flourished, as we see in the book, in the overseas, not in India. And one of the major reasons what Raman has mentioned in the book is that these Chettiars were originally concentrated in 78 villages where agricultural productivity was low. And at the same time, during their trade, they wanted to avoid this double taxation of the British and the disfavors that the native businessmen used to face. And so they went to other parts of the world. But what is quite interesting that they sailed through all countries which were different colonies, such as Burma and Ceylon, then a Dutch colony, which is Sumatra, Indonesia, then French colony, Vietnam, Indochina. So there were also native rulers in Thailand and Hong Kong. They were quite comfortable with all these places. They kept themselves insulated. But does it explain that because of these reasons, they went to other parts of the world, which were also colonies? They could sail through all these colonial regimes, but they were not able to do their business in India, and they could not flourish because of the kind of disadvantages they faced during the British rule. What is also interesting in this account that it gives a clear trajectory how money lending capital was basically transformed into productive capital, and it is basically a kind of usury transformed into productive capital through dispossession, as I see, which is also explained in this book, that these Chettiar capitals, they used to give loans to even landlords during the British rule because they had to pay their revenues. They used to give loans to small planters, to rubber planters, to tea planters, to Chinese tin miners and Indian tin miners. And whenever there is a defaulter, when they are not able to pay their loans, this is the physical assets which are being appropriated by these Chettiars. And they accumulated these physical assets through this process of dispossession. And I find that this is basically an account of primitive accumulation which was happening, where the direct producers were alienated, and the process happened from money lending to this productive capital, emergence of this productive capital. Interesting point is that they innovated financial instruments. So they innovated hundis, they created mortgages, insurance companies, and so on. And they used community capital to create banks. So the Canara Bank, Syndicate Bank, corporation banks who operated in Singapore and other parts of Southeast Asia, they were created by these Chettiars. I would say that, so what comes in my mind that India has a tradition of this kind of money lending, which most of the speakers have addressed and acknowledged. And Professor Bakshi once said that it is Hawala, it is basically Banglo, Haveli, Chawl kind of capitalism which emerged in India, which is trading and money lending dependent. And probably it still continues, because if you have the opportunity to make money through financial assets, and then you would not be inclined to do the hard work of entrepreneurship, what Professor Nasir Tabji was mentioning. So I think Indian capitalism or Indian capital has these original genes that you basically depend upon trading and money lending, and the easy way of money making was always their choice, and we are still bearing those genes. And so we find that even if the profit increased during the last decade of the Indian corporates, but we do not see an adequate amount of investment in physical assets. So this is even continuing today. The other interesting fact that comes out from this account that the Chettiars could withstand crisis. See, one thing that comes out that even during the Great Depression, the big Chettiars, they gained. They took opportunity by, they gained by taking opportunity of the disadvantage of the others. So when the price of commodities fell during the Great Depression of, say, tea, rubber, coconut, when the Europeans invented modern ways of tin extraction and the conventional way was on the decline, when the demand for automobile declined after the automobile boom, and so the rubber demand declined. So all these planters, producers, they were affected. But the big Chettiars, they actually took this as an advantage. So the same thing that when they were not able to pay their loans to whom they were giving credit to, when they were not able to pay these loans, these huge amount of stretches of land were being appropriated by the Chettiars. So they could withstand the crisis, but and they could accumulate during the same process, and they used all these disadvantages of other people for this extraction. Now, what is also interesting in this book that all these factors of growth and decline, as Professor Raman mentioned in the beginning, international factors are the crucial determinants of the dynamics of the Chettiars. So the fall in commodity prices, and then again at the end, the decline was basically because of the Japanese occupation of Rangoon and Singapore, and because of the rise of nationalism in Burma. So they could not actually bring back the capital, which was in the form of physical assets in these countries, and so they lost. So a huge loss was basically because of this existence of this business and growth of this business totally dependent upon overseas business. So which is quite interesting, that why did this happen? Why they were not able to foresee, which Professor Nasir was mentioning, that they were so blind about what is happening during that particular time, and they lost because of that. Even if they return back, what is their major areas of investment? Their areas of investment had been mostly in insurance, banking, stock brokerage, trading, and then in transport, in music production, in gramophone and cinema. So as they moved from money lending, trading to tertiary sector, but they, as everyone, all of the speakers have noted, that they were not basically interested in producing something. They didn't spend their money, which they have accumulated for 1.5 decades, in producing something, in manufacturing. They shied away from cotton textile business when they faced competition from the Marwadis and the Multanis in Tirupur and Coimbatore. Now, actually, capital growing without facing competition is basically the story. So you basically pick up those areas where there is no competition, or there is competition but little competition, and you basically depend upon the process of accumulation basically depends upon those sectors rather than facing competition. Now, this is quite interesting, and this is, I'm not able to understand why it has happened. And probably what has been already been raised, that does this really reflect entrepreneurship or not? Because you ultimately depend upon money lending and trading. And when you move to services, of course, service is also a productive activity. But I would also like to know that what they are doing at the moment. At the moment, what is the status of the Chettiars in South India, where they were active? And do we see any trajectory of using this huge amount of capital that they have accumulated for the 1.5 centuries, whether they are investing in any productive activities or not? So these were some of the questions that I had in my mind reading this very interesting book. So I stop here.
Thank you, sir, for the insightful comments. And now we'll request Raman Mahadevan, sir, to kindly respond to some of the comments raised by the panelists.
Yeah. Thank you, Nasir, Harish, and Satyaki, for your very interesting observations and comments. Now, I will group my answers thematically rather than addressing each of them. I will first go into this question which about the pattern of industrialization, the variations in the pattern of industrialization in South in relation to Western India and Eastern India. You talked about cotton in Western India and how they were able to, take advantage of the market in the overseas, the Chinese market, and but that was only for a limited period, and then they had to adapt and adjust to they lost the Chinese market, and then they had to adapt and adjust to the internal market. That's so far as the Bombay textile industry is concerned. And jute likewise, initially, yes, I mean, they had access, but then post 30s, jute was losing out. I mean, one has to take a long-term view. Jute was losing out to other substitutes. So, and insofar as South is concerned, you talk about oil seeds. Now, oil seeds was, was largely we didn't have the technology at this time for converting oil seeds. And how important was oil seeds as a commodity at this point of time? And groundnut was quite significant. Large areas were under groundnut. How significant was it? I mean, we are really talking about the 1920s and 30s. The kind of industries that come up in Tamil Nadu at this point of time are largely textiles, and they did have an advantage in textiles in as much as there was a huge handloom industry. So there was a captive market which required cotton, and I think in response to that, you have this growth of textile industry in South, initially by a non-Indian capital, basically European capital in the form of managing agency, European managing agency, English companies, and later the Indians step in a very big way. So my question is, how is the South Indian cotton industry in any way not comparable with those in Western India? In fact, I would say when the deglomerating tendencies were operating in Western India, coincided with the rise of the South Indian industry. In fact, South Indian industry really takes off only post-1930s. Now, regards the other set of issues which all of you raised, namely, the fact that Chettiars cannot be categorized as really entrepreneurial in the sense in which we understand entrepreneurship, that they lacked a vision, and that I don't know whether or they were not, how shall we put it, daring enough to, of moving into areas which required long gestation, thing. I don't know whether one can generalize, because you take the leather. I have cited in my book the case of this leather entrepreneur who really turned the leather industry around in South India, to the point that from exporting hides and skin, he was single-handedly instrumental in tying up with the Leather Institute in Chennai and in transforming Tamil Nadu to go in for import substitution in leather manufacture. So that is one. And as for, you see, the major constraint, as I see, is that the fact that it's not as though they were completely cocooned in the overseas, and that they were impervious to what was happening around them. You see, the fact is that the manner in which the system was developed, that the owners were all based in South India, and the enterprises were in the overseas. So there was a certain communication gap between what was happening at the ground level, whether it's in Burma or Malaysia, and firm bosses, the bosses of the people who control the firm, sitting in either Chennai or in Karaikudi or some town in Ramanathapuram. You see, that was partly responsible for this. But despite that, there were people like Vele and Chettiars, who knew Burmese very well, and who had established very close relationship with Aung San, and was in fact negotiating for a fairly reasonable deal, so that the Chettiars could honorably exit from Burma. But unfortunately, he was assassinated. I talk about that in the book. And that was a major turning point in the situation going against them. As for Harish's point about whether we can really call them a Vaishya, you see, from what I could gather, they were very devout Shaivites and they were vegetarians. At what point of time they become non-vegetarian, one doesn't know. Possibly it's because of the overseas connection. The overseas connection might have been instrumental, might have influenced them to change their dietary patterns, But otherwise, they were very hard.
I think you mentioned about the guy who got into leather, right? I mean, tannery. I can't imagine a Marwadi or a Gujarati Jain entering, tannery business. And you're right. I mean, he was one of the guys who pushed CLRI. Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, to the point that he had set up a tannery not in India but in Sri Lanka. The first tannery which he set up was in Sri Lanka. And it was only after when he realized that, it was not feasible to operate from Sri Lanka and things were going against them even in Sri Lanka. That's when they decided to move to Tamil Nadu and set up this leather processing plants in and around Chennai. And his name is Nagappa Chettiar. He was an absolutely, in fact, TSR Subramaniam, who was a civil servant and who's written this autobiography of his life as a civil servant all across India, posted largely in UP, but he had a fairly long stint as the controller of imports and exports in Chennai. And he came in contact with this gentleman. And he goes to the extent of saying that in his long association in civil service, he hasn't come across such a brilliant entrepreneur as Nagappa Chettiar. He says he could well have been made a finance minister. He was so sharp and so very insightful. Yeah. So that was one.
Again raises the question. See, like today, the entire tannery business in the south, whether it is Vaniambadi or anything, is now entirely controlled by Muslims. There are no Chettiars. So again, I think that agility. I think.
The Muslims were always there. What I meant was the fact that a Chettiar could encroach a field which was dominated by Muslims does really bring out the entrepreneurial spirit in him. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that they were not, but I think Nasir, you're right that I think this is a point which Sadiki also made, that this is true of most Indian entrepreneurs, that they hesitate in sort of moving into areas where they feel that they don't have, where the returns are not commensurate with their expectations, where the gestation period could be long, and where big technology is involved, and there is a certain hesitation. But despite that, I mean, you do find, the Raja Sir Annamalai Chettiars, a branch of that family, M.A. Chidambaram, for instance, goes into automobiles. He acquired the automobile API, Automobile Products of India, the company which manufactured Lambretta, goes into the manufacture of Perkins diesel engines, and then finally into chemicals, SPIC, which proved to be a disaster. But so that is it. And but essentially, I would say that they did fall significantly short of coming to grips of sensing the winds of change which were occurring in the 1930s, and were not quick enough to seize the opportunities to adjust and accommodate, and they could very well have avoided some of these the situation in which they eventually found themselves. But but you're right. I mean, there was no attempt to culturally assimilate themselves with the local people, whether in Burma or whether in Malaya. And in that sense, they were rather led a very cocooned kind of life, and therefore had to face the wrath, whether in the all the peasant uprisings, many of the peasant uprisings, whether in the 30s, early 30s, late 30s, and the 40s, many of them were directed against the Chettiars, and they had to pay the price for, being, in sense, isolated multinational social islands, as somebody put it, with very little social integration, with very little attempt to engage in any kind of public investment in schools and hospitals in these places and win the goodwill of the local people. You're right, Nasir and Harish and Satyaki. In that sense, they were very isolated in these places. But there was a realization that that things had to change, and that's the point that my book makes, that from the 1930s the whole social network comes apart, and so each Chettiar is now having to operate individually and goes in for the joint stock model. So all these companies which are set up in the 30s and largely in the tertiary sector are individual private limited companies, whether in trading, whether in insurance, stockbroking, and cinema distribution. And yes, so these are some of the companies.
Now it is time for questions from the floor.
Yes.
So the floor is open. So anybody wants to ask question, please use the hand button. I think Ramohan sir is there in the audience. So, sir, do you want to ask something?
Can I, my name is Keshav Das, can I sort of just,
Yes,
Please
so
go ahead.
I do not by any chance claim to be an economic historian or familiar with business history, but I'm sort of just wondering, when faced with this kind of very severe challenges abroad, a community which is other, I mean, they might be making money, so that doesn't make them a lesser human being. I mean, in business, of course, you make money. I think that is also true in many other professions. Everyone wants to benefit from the system, so whether it's money or any other advantages in life. So I think that's very much part of the human nature. So I wouldn't get into that. But my little question is about the alternative strategies, meaning like whether some of them were sort of looking for alternative occupations, not just confined to business, manufacturing, or entrepreneurship. That's what we have attributed to them. We are saying that they are entrepreneurial or they were sort of commercial kind of a society. But they faced with a very real life situation like this, where they were sort of losing out very severely. So whether individuals were responding to looking for other occupations. That is one question. The second thing is, I was a little keen to know about whether there was any difference between men and women. When the Chettiars, so essentially you are all the time maybe talking about men. So what about the women? Like whether they had a different view, whether they thought of a different strategy to sort of overcome this, or they failed, something like that. So I just would like to explain. Thank you.
Thanks, Keshav. Very interesting question. Yes, they do consider other, apart from banking, which was, of course, a community occupation, and that's what I talk about, the manner in which they brought into form this whole intra-caste banking structure, which is what took them abroad, So it was a system where the not so well-off Chettiars worked as agents and went abroad for a period of 3 years, worked as agents and ensured that to the Malay peasant, to the Burmese peasant, made enough money, came back, and either worked as an agent in another company or chose to branch off on his own. This was one. But what you see from the turn of the centuries, some of the Chettiars are moving into the field of broadly the cultural field, literature, for instance. Many of them promoted very well-known news magazines, newspapers. Some of the leading newspapers of this time were, whether Kumaran, Veerakeshari, Vaishyamitran, a whole lot of Tamil newspapers were run by Chettiars, Dhanavanikan, Dhanavaishyamitran, a whole lot of them, both in India, in Sri Lanka. Veerakeshari, for instance, was a very popular Tamil newspaper in Sri Lanka, widely read by all the Tamilians there, and which took up the cause of the Tamil plantation labor in a major way. So you had people moving into these areas. And much later, of course, you had, the Kumudam magazine, which is the most popular magazine in Tamil Nadu, was again managed and run by a Chettiar. So you have that. It is Keshav, can you hear me? Yeah. So it was really only after the this traumatic experience of the Second World War and the enormous losses that many of them incurred, as Harish was saying, and possibly Satyaki also made this point, that some of them, all of them didn't lose. Many of them managed to, because they had a very diversified investment portfolio. So they didn't, it's the lower middle class Chettiars who had put all their eggs in one basket and whose investments were largely in Burma. They were the ones who lost out, and they were in large numbers as well. So, and the problem with all the existing literature, community studies, whether it's the Marwadis or whether it's the Gujarati Banyas, does not factor in this differentiation process, which my study tries to emphasize. We have to talk about the lower middle class, the middle class, the upper, the elite. You can't just club all these guys together. So the people who lost out were the lower middle class Chettiars. And what you see, Keshav, after independence, after 47, is a very conscious attempt to move away from business and to go into the professions. And fortunately for them, there were these educational institutions in South India, Annamalai University, Alagappa Institute, Tyagarajar College, which these young Chettiar boys and girls were able to cash in on that and move away from business into the profession. So now a good number of the Chettiars, are professional in the IT sector, all across the world. Very large diasporas in US, in Canada, in Australia, and in the Middle East. Basically doing white collar work or running startup companies and financial advisors and the like. They're not into hardcore business like their forefathers. So that change happens in a big way in this thing. But you could see that even in the pre-independence period. And as for the other question, yes, it was very patriarchal. In fact, the men went alone to the overseas branches as agents or as in other capacities, but never the woman. The woman never accompanied them. The woman stayed back to look after the family. They did some small business of their own. They were well versed in accounting because they kept a close tab on their investments, because they had some capital as well, which came in the form of dowry or bride's price, so which was invested very judiciously in their firms, and they could monitor that. So that was an important source for capital mobilization by the Chetty firms, the money deposited by or invested by the women. Other than that, they ran their homes, but it remained patriarchal. And in fact, I was telling someone the other day that the situation hasn't changed very much even to this day, because in as late as 2023, one of the woman shareholders of the firm, or rather two sisters, whose father was a major shareholder, he passed away. And since there were no males in the family, the two daughters that he had inherited his property. And by virtue of a significant shareholding control over the company, they wanted a place in the board of directors. And that was denied by the family, saying that we do not allow women to become members of the board of directors. You can control shares, you will get returns on your investment, but you cannot have a voice in the management. So things haven't changed even to this day. So they are rather conservative.
Yeah, I think even Chidambaram faced the same problem, P. Chidambaram, because I think his wife was a Gounder.
Yes.
So I think he was removed from the community. So he cannot. Yeah, I think a lot of these very ultra orthodox practices.
That's right. Yeah.
So there are some questions in the chat box. So one is, did the Chettiars? Can you hear, sir? Sir, in chat box there are some questions.
Yeah.
Did the Chettiars face barriers to enter the other parts of India? Why they did not fight with the Marwadis?
No, that question of which both Nasir also raised and Satyaki also raised. This pertains to a period when the cotton market was just being developed. It was the initial stages of the cotton market. In relation to their investments abroad, Chettiar investments were not insignificant, but you see, they were not into financing cotton in a big way from the beginning, you see. Where they were associated was essentially, one is, of course, they started out as traders, trading in Sri Lanka. Then they went to Calcutta. They had one of the earliest sort of migration from outside the southern region was to Calcutta, in fact. As far back as very early 1810 or 1812, they are there. And they're actually procuring rice from the eastern region and transporting it to Sri Lanka, where there was a demand for rice. So that took them to Calcutta, and from Calcutta, they moved to Burma. Now, there was no barrier to entry, but possibly language could have been a barrier, because you see, the language of communication at this point of time, I'm talking about the 19th century, was really Tamil, and they pick up English much later. English comes into vogue amongst the Chettiars much later, when when they go outside and they have to communicate with others, with the English officials. That one, and even there they used, they had, the accountants were invariably Brahmins. The Chettiar accountants based in the head office in Chettinad were usually Brahmins. And they in fact acted as interpreters for the Chettiars initially. But later, of course, the Chettiars themselves picked up English. So there was no barrier to their moving anywhere outside India. It's just that it was the comfort zone. They were much more comfortable in South India and in Sri Lanka. And then, of course, they had traditional links with Malaysia going back to the medieval times. I mean, there's no, there is some evidence, I mean, oral evidence to the effect that they were trading with in the Malacca Straits and all that. So that is when opportunities emerged, it was easier for them to move outwards, eastwards, out of onto Bay of Bengal, rather than move inwards to other regions. I mean, you don't even see them moving to Andhra or Karnataka in a big way at this point of time. I'm talking about 19th century. Even the Kerala connection is much later, the Travancore connection is much later. So they're really most comfortable in the Tamil region, they're financing the zamindars, helping the zamindars to meet the revenue, the English revenue demand. So the Ramnad Zamindari, for instance, was indebted to a handful of leading Chettiar firms, and yeah, so that is it. So there was really, in that sense, why they didn't take on, to respond to the question, why they didn't take on the Marwadis and the Multanis is because, they were not active in these markets, they just, they had already moved out before the Multanis came. So where was the question of their coming back? It was a one-way flow from South India to Burma and to Malaya. So there was no return flow back into South India in any major way at this point of time. I'm talking about the last quarter of the 19th century or the 20th century, right until 1930. There was very little return flow of capital from there.
There are 3 more questions in the comment box.
Yeah.
Shall I read it, sir?
Yeah, please.
One is, sir, can you share your thoughts on Chetty capital in relation to early Tamil nationalism in the 19th century or the Dravidian movement in 20th century?
Again, I have not looked analyzed this very deeply. It's a very interesting question. All I will say is that it's a kind of very fluid, mixed kind of thing. You can't make any categorical statement in relation to the Dravidian movement or the national movement. There were many of very well-to-do Chettiars who had thrown in their lot with the Justice Party and who were supporting the Justice Party. This included the Raja Sir Annamale Chettiar group and the Murugappa group. But there were others who were members of the Congress Party, of the Indian National Congress. And there is evidence to that effect. In fact, they have attended Indian National Congress, contributed to Congress. And this continues. So there were many who were with the Congress. There were some who were with the Justice Party, and later E.V. Ramaswamy Nayakar. So it was a mixed lot. I mean, you can't generalize it for the entire community, given the differentiation process. There were some who were with the Congress and some who were with the Justice Party.
Okay, sir. So Ramohan sir has asked, Raman, thank you so very much for your fascinating talk. And could you tell us a little more about the inheritance right in Chettiar families, and did men and women have equal rights to the house, land, and business assets?
No, inheritance rights in the sense that you see the eldest son really of the Vilasam, as they say, or the family firm, inherited most of the property, the major share. And the sons, and if they had more than one son, the other sons received their share. It was divided equally amongst the sons, with the eldest son getting having a major share in the firm. So when the head of the family firm decided to call it a day and retire, it was the eldest son who assumed control over the family firm, in that sense. So, for instance, when Raja Annamale Chettiar passed away, it was his eldest son, Raja Sir Muthaiya Chettiar, who assumed control over the firm. Likewise, other firms as well. Yeah. So, woman inherited the share from, whatever property they inherited at the time of marriage, and which was invested was their share. I mean, they had no, say over the management of the firm. They had no rights over the firm or the family firm. I hope that answers.
Sir, one more question.
Yeah.
Maybe this may be the last question, I think. While it is correct that the capital was mostly employed into trading or finance, we need to take into account the fact that Chettiars, or for that matter, all Indian capitalists of that time, operated in a colonial setup that hardly encouraged manufacturing, except after the start of World War to support the war effort. Thank you for your wonderful seminar and congratulations to sir.
You want me to respond to that?
It's up to you, sir.
No. There was a lot of Indian capital which was, whether in South or North, which was moving into industry despite colonialism, despite the presence of the British and thing. So I don't think there was any constraint in that sense. I mean, it was not a level playing field, but when opportunities emerged, Indian capital was not found wanting in taking advantage of those opportunities to move into industry. Yeah.
Any other comments or suggestions from the panelist? Or
Can I?
Yes, sir, please.
If you permit me.
Yes, sir, please.
Good afternoon to all, sir. This is Dr. Murugesan Ramaswamy. I belong to that area. It's obviously it is I almost Raman sir has taken me back to my village and my own area, and how my people, my tradition, my system, my culture, everything has been reflected. Thank you very much, sir, for having an in-depth study in particularly in that particular community, in the business community, I would say. I have nothing to supplement here, only except complimenting the author for giving this, and other experts also are there. Really wonderful seminar that I have been attending today. I am here as a director of National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, and I'm looking after this all the 8 states. I think this is very, very useful for me. For now, it's really wonderful, observations made by the author, and particularly in the area of finance business, microfinance. So that's also spread across obviously the Nobel Prize went to Professor Yunus. It should have been gone to our Chettiars, in fact. This is what my my opinions are whenever I study this. Basically, I'm a student of economics with entrepreneurship background. Since I have chosen this academic line, I could not be in my own parental business. Obviously, sir, one small submission or supplements is that Chettiars have been started with their agribusiness, then it was been expanded to other areas or sectors that we can say automotive or whatever may be the same. Not only in the country and in the overseas also. So thank you very much, sir, for joining this very good observations. This is really revisiting to my place. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
So can we end the presentation? So we'll just, on behalf of ISID, we thank Raman sir as well as all the panelists for taking time and joining us, and for the wonderful, insightful and stimulating discussions. Thank you, everyone, and also congratulations to Raman sir and best wishes.
Thank you very much, Beena, and Thanks to you and to all your colleagues and to all my fellow panelists, Nasir, Harish, Satyaki, and Keshav. I can see Saikat has also been there, I think, and Ram Mohan and many others. Thanks for tuning in and making this very interesting. And thanks for all the comments and observation, my co-panelists. I will sit and mull over it and work on it. And it's something which, and let's meet again and take this discussion, continue this discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
It's
you,
nice,
sir.
sir.
Thank you. Thank you.